Today, we are diving into the 7 worst foods for joint pain and arthritis, followed immediately by the absolute best foods you should be eating instead. While I will focus heavily on osteoarthritis, we will also cover rheumatoid arthritis and gout. Having dealt with numerous old injuries myself, I know firsthand how they can come back to haunt you as you get older. Because of that, arthritis and inflammation are always top of mind for me. I am constantly researching this topic, and I recently uncovered some incredibly fascinating information that I want to share with you. First, I need to define a couple of basic terms so we are on the same page. The first term is chondrocyte. What exactly is that? It is simply the type of cell that makes up your cartilage. When you are dealing with joint pain, it is crucial to look closely at what actually builds a joint and study how it functions. Understanding this specific information could potentially help you completely resolve your arthritis pain. So, what did I discover? While studying these chondrocytes and looking into how inflammation develops, I noticed a constant reference to a specific cell component. Before I give you its name, think of it as a crucial part of an assembly line inside your cells that helps build certain structures. This particular component is responsible for folding proteins. Imagine folding a paper airplane. You have to fold it in a precise way for it to fly properly. Your cells work the exact same way. Deep inside your cells, you have a tiny factory that manipulates different amino acids to shape proteins perfectly. This factory component is called the endoplasmic reticulum. It is the part of the cell machinery that folds proteins so your body can actually use them, and it also stores calcium. What I found so remarkable is that out of all the different things that can happen inside a cell and all its moving parts, researchers repeatedly pointed to this specific part of the factory. When this component experiences stress, it triggers the entire cascade of inflammatory events, even before any mitochondrial damage occurs. I found that absolutely fascinating. Hang with me, because there are a few more pieces to this puzzle, but that is the very first one. The second thing I learned was even more mind-blowing. It turns out that these chondrocytes contain receptors specifically for bile salts. Now, hold on a second. Bile salts belong in your gallbladder, so why on earth do you have receptors for bile inside your joints? It did not make sense to me at first either. I had to dive deep into the research for an hour or two to really wrap my head around it. In short, here is what I found. There are 2 types of bile. You have primary bile, which your liver produces to help you digest fats, but you also have secondary bile. Secondary bile is created when your gut microbes take your primary bile and modify it. Your microbes are not actually manufacturing bile from scratch. They are altering yours to give it entirely new functions in the body that go way beyond simple fat digestion. In other words, bile salts have other critical jobs, and one of those jobs is acting as a powerful anti-inflammatory right inside your joints. Apparently, some of these bile salts enter your bloodstream, travel to different areas like your joints, and work to protect them while reducing inflammation, which is incredibly interesting. Back when I was in active practice, I noticed that whenever patients had their gallbladders removed or took a course of antibiotics, they almost always developed some form of arthritis or joint pain afterward. That really got the wheels turning for me on this topic. Then I remembered TUDCA. What is TUDCA? It is a highly specialized bile salt that people take as a supplement. However, until I looked closely at the data, I had no idea that one of TUDCA's unique benefits is its ability to directly reduce this endoplasmic reticulum stress. This specific bile salt relieves stress on that exact cellular factory. Once I realized that, it all started making sense. The bile is not just lowering inflammation, it is actively supporting the cellular factory responsible for repairing, maintaining, and building your joints, which is a foundational part of the entire process. This connection shows that bile is absolutely vital for protecting your cellular machinery and keeping inflammation out of this specific area. If something disrupts your bile levels and you become deficient, you experience more of this endoplasmic reticulum stress. What happens next? A domino effect triggers mitochondrial stress, causing the entire apparatus to break down. Calcium is also heavily involved here, because this endoplasmic reticulum is responsible for storing calcium. As you can imagine, when we talk about joint health, we are also talking about preventing unwanted calcification. This is a brand new, foundational concept, and I am going to connect it to both the worst and best foods for arthritis so you can get enough of what you need from your diet, control the process, and reduce joint inflammation. You have probably heard of the gut-brain axis, but there is also a gut-joint axis, and that is exactly where this information comes from. I will include a link down below if you want to read more about it. Essentially, these bile salts are potent anti-inflammatories, specifically the secondary bile salts that your own microbes alter. While we are on the topic of bile, I want to briefly touch on TUDCA again. It is a distinct type of bile salt that technically originates as bear bile, though today it is produced synthetically rather than taken from animals. This specific bile is incredibly powerful at shutting down the inflammatory signaling molecules involved in arthritis. I won't overwhelm you with more complex terminology, but just know that TUDCA is highly effective at halting inflammation across all types of arthritis. Now, let's look at another critical piece of the puzzle, vitamin K2. You might be familiar with vitamin K1, which is responsible for blood clotting. Some people take a medication called warfarin to block vitamin K1, thin their blood, and prevent heart attacks. That is what vitamin K1 does. Vitamin K2, however, performs a completely different function. It prevents calcium from accumulating in your soft tissues. If you happen to be deficient in vitamin K2, you can end up with calcification in your joints, your arteries, or even develop osteophytes, which are little bone spurs that form around the joints. Interestingly, one of the side effects for people taking warfarin is that it blocks not only vitamin K1, but it also stops vitamin K2 from working. This is why a known side effect of warfarin is increased calcification of the soft tissues in both the joints and the arteries. It is pretty wild to think that someone might take warfarin for heart health, only for it to cause calcium buildup in the blood vessels surrounding the heart. To me, that seems completely counterintuitive. The key takeaway for you is that vitamin K2 is found in higher fat foods. I will explain this in more detail when we get to the dietary choices, but remember that this vitamin is absolutely essential for keeping calcium out of your joints and bringing inflammation down. Next, let's talk about rheumatoid arthritis, or RA. This is an autoimmune condition where your immune system mistakenly attacks your own body. The body produces antibodies that target the joints, keeping them in a state of chronic inflammation. Without getting bogged down in immune system terminology, it ultimately comes down to an imbalance between two specific elements. All you need to know is that there is an incredibly important vitamin that helps put out this fire and lower inflammation, vitamin D. However, taking standard amounts of vitamin D will not give you a therapeutic effect. In fact, it won't do much at all. You have to take large doses to achieve a true therapeutic benefit for your joints. Realistically, you are targeting the immune system itself, because rheumatoid arthritis is fundamentally an immune issue rather than just a joint problem. There are many different autoimmune diseases out there, and RA is simply one that manifests in the joints, but the root issue lies within the immune system. As far as dosage goes, I would recommend taking a bare minimum of 20,000 IU of vitamin D daily, though 30,000 or 40,000 IU is likely better. I will place a link below to a doctor you can consult with if you have rheumatoid arthritis to help monitor your vitamin D levels and run the proper tests to ensure you are doing it safely. When you take high doses of vitamin D3, you should always combine it with magnesium, zinc, and vitamin K2 because they all work together as a team. Doing this will dramatically lower joint inflammation. Whether you are dealing with rheumatoid arthritis or osteoarthritis, vitamin D is one of the most powerful anti-inflammatories available, particularly for the knees, lower back, and frankly, any joint in the body. When you are deficient in vitamin D, your inflammatory markers spike dramatically. When you experience arthritis or joint pain, certain triggers can also come directly from your diet, such as food allergies, which we will address. Some of the most common issues in food involve advanced glycation end products, or AGs. These are created when glucose or sugar binds to a protein. Essentially, eating a high carbohydrate diet generates these sticky proteins, which then spark inflammation. Researchers have also discovered a structure called a biofilm inside arthritic joints. A biofilm is a layer of slime or protective glue that houses microbes inside tiny calcium shells, making them invisible to your immune system. Surprisingly, studies have found that some of these hidden microbes actually originate from your teeth. If you have an old, infected root canal where the infection lingers in your gums over time, those microbes can leak into your lymphatic system and bloodstream. From there, They can travel straight to your joints and arteries, keeping your body in a constant state of arthritis. However, the major piece of news I wanted to share today is this massive connection to the microbiome. The impact your gut microbiome has on your joints is significantly larger than I previously realized, and it is exactly what we are going to dive into as we look at the foods right now. Let's break down the 7 foods you want to avoid. Keep in mind that these are not always whole foods. Many are common ingredients hidden inside everyday products. First up are emulsifiers. An emulsifier is an ingredient used to blend and bind components together so they stay completely mixed. You will frequently see emulsifiers like polysorbate 80 listed on packages. They are common in frozen desserts and creamy dressings, and they severely disrupt your gut microbiome. Remember, it is that very same microbiome that helps produce the vital bile salts your joints rely on. There is a strong link between eating foods containing these emulsifiers and experiencing joint inflammation, so I want to make sure you are aware of them. The second ingredient to avoid is low-fat soy protein powder. If you check the ingredient labels on certain protein bars, you will often find soy protein isolate. This is a highly processed industrial protein that is completely stripped of fat. I have known many people who rely on this type of protein and end up with chronic joint aches and arthritis. The reason for this is that it interferes with the liver. When you avoid animal proteins and get your protein strictly from sources like soy or other plants, you consume very little to no taurine. Your body absolutely requires taurine to manufacture bile. This lack of taurine is a major missing piece in a vegan diet. Without it, you lack the primary compound needed to stimulate bile production and prompt your gallbladder to contract. You need dietary fat for that process to happen. Consequently, people on low-fat diets frequently end up with a bile deficiency, which can ultimately lead to arthritis issues. Additionally, there can be lingering residues of hexane, a chemical solvent used during the processing of soy protein. Some people argue that the hexane evaporates and leaves no trace, but unfortunately, there is currently no regulatory oversight monitoring this. It might be there, or it might not. We simply do not know for sure. As I mentioned, you will not get the necessary bile stimulation from this protein. Instead, it triggers inflammation in the liver and digestive tract, which directly disrupts your beneficial gut microbes. Number 3 is refined seed oils. Let me clear something up here. When you look at studies on seed oils, researchers often state that replacing saturated fats with seed oils leads to improvements in cardiovascular function and insulin sensitivity. I am not disputing those specific findings. My question is, what quality of oil did they actually use in those studies? Did they use the standard oil found in fast food restaurants that is heated, cooled, and reheated repeatedly for days or weeks at a time? Absolutely not. There are high-quality seed oils available that are cold-pressed with minimal refining. On the other hand, you have standard commercial oils that are heavily refined, bleached, deodorized, and heated to 570 degrees. Heating oils to that extreme creates toxic byproducts called aldehydes. These aldehydes cause extensive damage to your joints, your arteries, your mitochondria, and the cells that regulate insulin. So, while someone can hypothetically claim these oils are perfectly fine, that leaves out the complete picture. It ignores the harmful byproducts generated by high heat and continuous reheating, as well as the aldehydes that form once these seed oils become part of your cellular membranes. Certain options, like cold-pressed safflower or sunflower oil, contain much lower levels of omega-6 fatty acids and are far higher in monounsaturated fats, similar to avocado and olive oil. However, that is entirely different from the processed oils most people buy at the grocery store or consume eating out. This is exactly why refined seed oils are highly inflammatory, particularly for your joints. Fourth on the list is alcohol, especially beer. Beer breaks down into compounds called purines, which can directly cause gout and spark intense inflammation in the joints. Furthermore, beer is packed with carbohydrates, meaning it causes a sharp spike in blood sugar that drives further inflammation. It isn't just beer that causes issues for arthritis sufferers, either. Wine and hard liquor do the same because they take a heavy toll on your liver. Unfortunately, anything that damages the liver will ultimately contribute to arthritis. Number 5 is casein A1 protein. While A2 protein causes far fewer issues, the conventional milk sold in most stores contains A1 protein, which is highly problematic for many people. This is especially true when it is ultra concentrated into ingredients like sodium caseinate and calcium caseinate. These ingredients are essentially pure, concentrated forms of casein A1 protein that will cause your joints to flare up, and they are incredibly common in processed bars because it is a very cheap protein sourced from China. You also find heavily concentrated casein A1 protein in processed cheeses, like American cheese. You want to stay away from these conventional, processed casein powders. They even add them to infant formula, which is likely why so many children end up developing milk allergies in the first place. If you choose to consume milk protein, look for A2 options. When you choose sheep's milk cheese, goat's milk cheese, or specific cow's milk cheeses, you can easily find A2 versions, which are vastly superior. Conventional milk containing the A1 protein comes from grain-fed cows rather than grass-fed ones. Additionally, if you compare milk to cheese, cheese is a far more concentrated source of that protein, meaning you will likely experience a much stronger inflammatory reaction from cheese than you would from standard milk. Number 6 is modern wheat, especially when compared to ancient grains. I create a lot of content around wheat, and the reality is that refined wheat products cause massive spikes in blood sugar. The carbohydrate it contains is a highly glycemic starch known as amylopectin A, which spikes your blood sugar even higher than table sugar and is intensely inflammatory. Beyond that, wheat contains WGA, or wheat germ agglutinin. This compound is nearly as inflammatory as gluten itself. It is a chemical that binds directly to your gut wall and can lead to a leaky gut. On top of that, we have to deal with glyphosate. Even though most modern wheat is not genetically modified, farmers still spray it heavily with the herbicide glyphosate to act as a drying agent right before harvest, meaning you absorb a significant amount of it. Exposure to glyphosate not only damages your microbiome, but it is also directly tied to systemic inflammation. Finally, there is gluten itself. Gluten is a protein that human beings genuinely struggle to digest properly. The breakdown byproducts of gluten can actually produce an opioid-like effect, which temporarily numbs the gut initially, only for you to experience delayed pain later on. There is an enormous amount of data linking gluten to arthritis, inflammation, and thyroid issues. Lastly, number 7 is high fructose corn syrup. This is not just regular sugar. It is a highly processed, synthetic industrial sugar. It contains a high concentration of fructose, which is well documented to cause severe liver inflammation and localized insulin resistance, driving inflammation both directly and indirectly. Because our bodies lack a natural off switch for fructose, people can consume massive quantities of it without ever feeling truly satisfied, making it incredibly dangerous. Now that we have covered the foods to avoid, let's look at the best foods you should actively eat, starting with fermented foods. Consuming options like sauerkraut, kefir, and Bulgarian yogurt helps build up the specific gut microbes needed to produce secondary bile salts. As we established, these secondary bile salts act as incredibly powerful anti-inflammatories directly inside your joints. The second group is healthy fats. This includes olive oil, avocado oil, and fish oils, as well as fats from grass-fed animals, which are highly beneficial. Grass-fed butter and grass-fed cheese are excellent choices here. Third, you want to focus on foods packed with high amounts of vitamin D3. Great options include wild salmon, cod liver, and cod liver oil. Ideally, you want to get as much direct sunlight as possible, but since sun isn't a food, many people choose to supplement during the winter months. Keep in mind that when you are dealing with active arthritis, you need to hit a therapeutic dosage of vitamin D. You want to aim for a minimum blood level of 60, but ideally target 70, 80, or sometimes even higher, depending on your specific situation. If you are also managing an autoimmune condition, you need those levels to be high to truly see the magic happen when it comes to halting inflammation. Just remember to pair it with vitamin K2 and magnesium to prevent any imbalances. Naturally, omega-3 fatty acids are incredibly important, and you can get plenty of them from fish and cod liver oil. You also want to incorporate sulfur-rich foods like onions, garlic, and cruciferous vegetables because your joints rely heavily on sulfur for health and repair. Finally, ensure you are getting an adequate amount of collagen by consuming bone broth, as collagen forms a massive part of your joint structure. If you are only eating standard meats like hamburgers or steaks, you are only getting a tiny fraction of the collagen your body requires. When you look at the human body and map out the ratio of general protein to collagen, it is clear we need at least 30% of our dietary protein to come from collagen. However, a typical steak only contains about 2 to 5% collagen because most people prefer tender cuts of meat. People generally avoid grass-fed, grass-finished steaks that require a lot of chewing, even though that toughness comes directly from the beneficial collagen. Because of this, you may need to source your collagen through other means. As a reminder, we already covered the importance of vitamin D, K2, and magnesium. I also want to emphasize keeping your iron levels low, as excess iron can directly trigger arthritis. Iron is a mineral that the body struggles to excrete once it is inside, so cooking consistently with cast iron skillets or taking unneeded iron supplements is not ideal, particularly if you are not menstruating. If you are a man with elevated iron levels, there is a very high probability it is driving inflammation in your body. Lastly, consider TCA. It is an exceptional remedy for arthritis, and now you understand the exact mechanism behind why it works so well. It directly targets and relieves endoplasmic reticulum stress while actively protecting the cartilage within your joints. Because TUDCA is such an incredible compound, if you want to fully understand all the benefits it has to offer, you definitely want to watch this video right here. Check it out.